What is the steps of a crime scene investigation? Crime scene investigators, police personnel, and lab technicians know the answer to this, but to the general public and to a jury, the subject can be unfamiliar. If you've seen CSI shows or crime TV dramas such as this, you may think you know about crime scene investigation and about the job investigators perform, but in reality it is quite different. TV shows make CSI seem like these foreign aliens that know the answer to everything and are able to catch the bad guys with half of a head hair. In the real world, their jobs are just as important as they are made to seem on television, but they are much more difficult, and so is the process of investigating a crime or a scene. This topic is especially important to me because I am a criminal justice major, and these are things I'll be using in my everyday life once I graduate. In order to describe crime scene investigation, we must start with some basic terminology. I have collected this information from a textbook called Trace Evidence Analysis, More Cases and Mute Witnesses, and a web article, Forensic Evidence and Crime Scene Investigation. Crime scene investigators are called in short CSIs or CSAs for crime scene analysts or forensic science technicians. This varies on the location you live in. For the purpose of this speech, we'll be referring to them as CSIs. CSIs are loosely defined as individuals with a forensic background who support the police, detectives, or other law enforcement in locating, collecting, and processing evidence. Crime scene investigation is defined as the use of evidence found at a scene of a crime and the use of scientific reasoning to gain knowledge about the events that surround the crime. We will refer to the place the crime occurs as a scene. A scene is where the crime went down and any surrounding area police and CSIs believe are relevant to the crime. So, what is the first step in any crime scene investigation? Television will have you believe that you arrive at a scene and the evidence is there waiting for you ready to go. But before you can even do any collection, you must secure the scene. I have an example of a scene secured pictured here. You can just see the crime scene tape. As stated in the textbook Crime Scene Investigation, a guide for law enforcement, the first officer to arrive at the scene must take every step possible to preserve and protect the crime scene the way it is. This is extremely important because the more the scene is damaged, the more contaminated evidence will be. Meaning, if a scene occurs outside in the public area or in an area with foot traffic, there is a large chance passersby will contaminate a scene without knowing it. When the evidence is contaminated, it will not hold up in court no matter how strong the evidence is. Officers should set up a pathway within the scene where they can walk to minimize the possibility of disturbing evidence. Scene security should be divided into 3 levels. Level 1 is the public or outer area of the scene. This is purely to shield the public from contaminating evidence. Level 2 is the inner or command area barrier. This barrier is to give even more space between where the crime occurred and the outside world. This area may be where CSIs and police set up their equipment. Level 3 should block off the scene of the crime into the immediate area. In this area, only CSIs and vital investigators should be allowed inside because this is where most of the evidence will be found and collected. Next, we must perform a walkthrough of the scene. This is simply where the investigator in charge surveys the surroundings to create a plan to process the scene for evidence. Any fragile evidence that is visible must be bagged, tagged, and photographed first. For example, say there is a fiber evidence from the suspect's clothing. If it is visible, we want to collect this quickly. There is nothing more embarrassing than having the evidence and getting it swept up by the breeze and losing it forever. Now we can search the scene. Television will have you believe that investigators just start randomly searching the secured scene for evidence. In fact, there are different methods for searching, and investigators must pick the best method for their situation. With a line or strip search method, 1 or 2 investigators start at one end of the scene and walk straight across to the other designated side. They then move a little farther to the side and walk across again, repeating until the scene is thoroughly searched. This method is best when there is a clear boundary established for the scene. If the boundaries of the scene are not clear, it is best not to use this method so we do not miss any evidence. Another method is the grid search pattern. The grid search pattern is much like the line pattern, but more thorough. This involves at least 2 investigators who perform the line search, but from adjacent corners that form perpendicular lines. The spiral search method involves only 1 investigator. The investigator or CSI will find the center of the crime scene and work their way out in a spiral until the entire scene is covered. The next method is probably one of the most thorough and most widely used. The zone or quadrant search method involves dividing the scene into 4 equal parts, where one team member is assigned to each part, and then they switch, ensuring that all areas of the crime scene are searched and seen by multiple people. These methods are pictured here. So we have the spiral here. We have our grid. This one is the strip here. And then we have our quadrant or zone. Unearthing the evidence is the most difficult part and the most important part of this process. All the work we do before this is purely to prepare and collect evidence from the scene. What we search for largely depends on the crime that has been committed. For example, if there was a burglary, we would look for any footprints, fingerprints, broken glass, points of entry, possible weapons, and any fibers or hairs that the suspects may leave behind. If there is a body at the scene, of investigators will pay very close attention to this area because most of the evidence is either found on or around the body. When any evidence is found, the investigators should always write notes on what has been recovered. They should also include sketches and photographs of the scene. When writing notes, investigators need to be very careful on what they jot down, though. We only write observations, not assumptions. For example, if we find an empty wallet, we must only write empty wallet, not victim was robbed. All notes will be presented in court, and if the victim was not robbed, this can create issues between the defense and the prosecution. After all the searching is finally done, the team will take one last survey of the scene, and everyone cannot leave until they're absolutely sure they have collected every possible piece of evidence. Thank you for listening to my speech, and I look forward to